So I am really excited. This is going to be a treat today. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see us. If you're listening on the podcast, then you probably want to go over and watch on YouTube too, because I have an amazing guest today. Jasmyne Chandler is here with me, and this is a treat for you guys. So I'm gonna do her little formal bio, but I want you guys to know that I've invited her here because I'm a super fan too. I follow her on social media, and you'll get this after I do her intro, but I'm just really a fan of her work. I think the work that she's doing is so powerful and it's so needed right now that so go over and follow her on her social channels and you'll see what I mean. And I'll put in the show notes her social channels and contact information and get to that. But part of why she's here is because I think you guys will really benefit from this conversation. But the other part that she's here is purely selfish because I think she's amazing and I like chatting with her. So let me do kind of the formal intro for you. Jasmyne is an international coaching federation certified trauma informed and professional life coach for teens and young adults. It's a mouthful, but it's freaking amazing. Not only is she the mom of two teens herself, she's spent the last 15 years working with teens as a high school teacher in GED programs as a GED instructor, advisor, and as a life coach, circle facilitator, and a mentor. She holds a master's degree in education, and she's been trained as a counsel facilitator and wellness rites of passage guide that we're going to talk more about. Because if you're listening and you're like, what in the world is that? She'll tell us a little bit about that. And she's the founder of Guided Passages, which offers youth programs, wilderness trips, and life coaching for teens and young adults in Southern Oregon, but also beyond. She has an online program too that you guys, I'm telling you, the work she does is amazing. Her main focus as a coach is to assist teens and young adults who may need additional guidance, support, and mentorship to help them build self-confidence, shift stuck negative energy and negative self-talk too, and really just embrace themselves, right? So for who they are and move toward positive change and activities in their lives. Now, after that mouthful of a paragraph, I want to say, like, what teen and young adult doesn't fit into that category? Like, as we were just, Jasmyne and I were just talking about, like, our former life, she was a teacher and I was too. And as an administrator in higher education, like, all of these literally thousands and thousands of kids' faces run through and young adults' faces run through my head as we talk about this. And I don't know that I've ever genuinely, of course there's a continuum, right, of struggle, but I don't know that I've ever met a young adult, particularly in the last 10 years or so, who doesn't have some level of need in these areas, a lack of self-confidence, like that terrible negative like voice in their head, wondering about their worth and questioning direction, and those things all come up, right? I mean, hell, they come up for us. I think, but particularly I think in this day and age, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I recently invited Jasmyne to be a guest on one of our coaching calls with our 12-week program, clients in our 12-week program. And those are all women. I talk about that program here a lot because I wanted her to talk with them. I really see a pattern of real need as adults who now we're to the stage where, like, we have either teenage kids or our kids are in their 20s and beyond for some of us. But in dealing with our teens and young adult children or family members and sometimes even in your professional lives, it's a struggle. It is hard to see them struggle. You don't know how to help them. And it creates more stress and internal strife for you too, because there is that, like, I don't know what to do for them. And you maybe even get frustrated with them and you get frustrated with yourself. And sometimes it turns into like this blow up, right? And it's counter to what you intended it to do, to be and do for them. And so she came to the coaching call and I was telling her just before we started recording that it was really a powerful call. The women really got so much from that conversation, and there were several who had lots of questions, and so this is a pattern I see of, we have our own struggles, right? Women come to me to lose weight and all of the things that are going on in our own lives, but then that's complicated even more so when we have teens and young adults in our lives who are struggling, and there is the vicious cycle, right? So I thought, why am I just hogging her for my clients on a coaching call? Why not record this podcast episode? And so she has graciously agreed to come here and share so much of her expertise and tips with you guys. So that's what this is about. Jasmine, again, I want to say thank you. And I know that was a really long intro, but I want people to know how freaking amazing you are as they listen into this episode. And so I just, turn it over to you. You want to say something before I ramble on?
Well, thank you so much for that amazing intro. It's such an honor to be here, and I'm one of your biggest fans too. I follow you on
Aw,
all the things too, and I just see all the amazing work that you're doing with all these women who, especially when we are struggling at home with our kids, our teens and young adults or whatever, to take the time for themselves to join your program or to be in your Facebook group and have that community support. I think that's so huge. I mean, that's when we're really modeling for our kids what we want them to have tools for and
yeah,
navigating their own lives. And it's also going to give us so much more in the way we're able to show up for them in those moments. So taking care of ourselves like that. So I think the work that you're doing is so foundational for them to really have what they need at the base level to be able to show up in the way they want for their kids and their family.
yeah,
So
yeah.
thank
And like I said, as I have conversations with women in the DMs, like hundreds of them daily. And then when I have conversations, with the women who express more of a commitment to their goals and they express, interest in finding out about my program, and I get on a Zoom call with them like this to talk about that coaching work and potentially working together, this issue comes up more and more and more in those kinds of like discovery calls, if you will. And it's one of the reasons that they often give me for wanting and needing coaching. They're just kind of at their wits' end sometimes with these young, teenagers, or like I said, young adults, 20 somethings, who a lot of times, and a lot more times I'll find they're living at home, right? Longer kids are living at home, and totally understandable with the cost of, housing and those kinds of things. But the stress of this struggle weighs on them heavily. And so they talk about it even more than I ever have seen. And so that's why I thought, oh my gosh, I have to share Jasmine with folks. So I know that women listening to this podcast episode are probably going, okay, yeah, get to it. Cause you like, yes, this is a problem for me too. So let's kind of start here. Talk a little bit about how parents can really balance like supporting their kids with their own self-care routines, right? Especially when the stress of their kids' struggles are impacting their health. So how do you kind of find that balance, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, I think that finding that balance is like the magic key, right? So if we're, we all know this. When we're giving from an empty cup, we don't have quality things to give. We can feel, stressed and overwhelmed, and so we're not as patient, we're not as compassionate. We're not as able to be present in the moments that they really need
Yeah.
us. And so we often get into this space of feeling guilty about taking time for ourselves and taking care of our own mental health and well-being. But in my view, it's the opposite of selfish. It's actually, something to be really proud of ourselves for, because when we do that, we are able to just really show up in a way for them that we weren't able to before. Instead of, constantly being in our stress response and being triggered by everything that they do, we can really start to separate, them from ourselves, not jump in the pool with them so much, really start to address like, controlling our own reactions, our own emotional regulation, our own health and well-being, so that when they are triggered, when they're in an emotional state, when they're not able to pull themselves up, we're there in that solid position. And so I think that balance is so important. And it can feel like, hey, we don't have the time. I don't have the time to
Yeah.
give myself when I'm also giving to them and I'm also working. But ultimately, we save so much time in the long run because we are able to, handle those challenges just so much more smoothly and so much more expediently when we are coming from that solid place in ourselves.
I love that. I could dive into it, but this could be like a 5 hour interview, conversation, whatever you want to call it. You hit on such like amazing points. One, I hear that, I should I spend this time? I feel selfish, those kinds of things, even the investment, like, should I dedicate funds to this? It feels selfish to do this when my, kid needs college tuition or my kid needs this. And you're absolutely right. A part of it is about you can't do for them and be the best for them and help them through their struggles if you're not right yourself, right? Physically, emotionally, mentally. So that is such a huge point. I'm glad that you raised it. The other thing, I think that warrants just like hitting the nail on the head about is we oftentimes get so frustrated with this struggle. I mean, because, these are, if you're talking about our own kids, I remember my own kids, like when they were at every stage, they have these different struggles related to growth and development and all of these things. So it's like by the time they get to be teenagers or in their 20s, it's like I'm wasted of this. I found it sometimes more difficult and their problems get bigger. Let's face it. It's not about somebody who didn't share in kindergarten. It's some real, for example, with girls, like it can be some major drama in friendships and social. So by the time you get there, they're more complicated kinds of struggles that are valid struggles that kids are having. And then you're just like exhausted of it sometimes, right? And so the reaction when you talk about jumping in the pool, like sometimes you just lose patience and you do jump in the pool and it becomes like this big ordeal that didn't have to be, right? If we're in that sort of reactionary response. And I think what I'm hearing you say is if you take better care of your physical, emotional, mental health, that is so much less likely to happen. And the long-term bond, right? The long-term relationship that you have, because your teenage daughter or son, either one, your early 20 something daughter or son, they're going to get through this and be 30 and 40. And the quality of your relationship can really be impacted, can it?
100%. Yeah. I mean, so much. I mean, I feel like what happens so often, like you said, is that we get so frazzled and triggered by all the things that are coming at us that we often get into that reactive space.
Yeah.
They do things that trigger us. They know our buttons. They know, they know all
Yeah.
the things.
Right.
And I have 100% been there. I mean, I had a really volatile relationship with my son. Most of his life because he was such an expert at pushing my buttons.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
would, I would label his behaviors and, I would kind of label him, as his behaviors instead of separating the two of those things out. And I was just highly reactive. And I hadn't really learned how, I was always trying to control him and control his actions.
Yeah.
And when I made the shift and started to recognize that it wasn't him that needed controlling, like I needed to just focus on I needed to control myself. I needed to figure out how to emotionally regulate myself and all
Yeah.
of that. And I sought coaching support for myself, and that shifted so much for me. And all of a sudden, I did my own healing work, and I really started to notice, oh, like he's triggering me. He's doing something right now, and that's separate from me. I have a choice in how I respond.
Yeah.
I get to choose, am I going to take the pause right now? Am I going to regulate myself before I respond? And as we do that, as we make those subtle shifts in ourself and the way that we approach all these situations with them, we slowly start to rebuild trust in our relationship.
Mm.
And trust is the foundation. If we want any to have any impact, if we want them to come to us for advice, if we want
Yeah.
to, have them walk into our room at 10 p.m. at night and share all the things, like we have to have solid trust with them. And we break trust when we're losing our, stuff all the time on them and we're
Yeah.
flipping out. When we're reacting really strongly to their mistakes, when we're labeling their behaviors and them all the time. And so, really figuring out ways that we can start to bring it back, bring the focus back to ourselves. What can I control? I can control
Yeah.
myself. Can't
Yeah.
control them. And then we co-regulate, we de-escalate, and we rebuild.
Yeah. As you're talking, a couple of things come to mind. One is we're modeling for them that appropriate action and reaction, right? So, there's all of that. And I think too about a time when our youngest daughter was in college, and it was kind of the beginning of my healing journey. And so I was learning a lot about, coaching, having a coach. I was learning a lot about what you're talking about. And we'd always told our kids, like, as long as you're in school or you're working toward your goals, like whatever that is, like we'll help you. But if you decide that you're just, going to quit, or you're just going to, like, do it on your own, then you're doing it on your own. Like, you're paying your bills, I mean, you are on your own, right? And I remember with her, the difference being that when I started working on myself and I did have control over my response, and I was reflecting that in appropriate ways in my interactions with her, she decided, she came home after her sophomore year, and she came home, and before going back to school at some point that summer, she said she wanted to have a conversation with us. And the gist of the conversation was she wasn't going back to school, and she decided she was dropping out of college. And I'll never forget how she handled that. I was really, really proud of her, and I was proud of myself too, because the way she handled that, it was in response to how I had learned to regulate myself and to verbalize to her the way things would be or wouldn't be, but putting that choice back in her court, right? It was like, this is how it is, but you have the choice, right? Instead of, that kind of thing. And so when she told us that she wasn't going to school, she'd already laid out a plan for herself and presented that plan to us, rather than just coming and saying, like, I quit school, right? And I thought, wow, I'm really proud of the way she handled that conversation. And wow, like, I was really proud of myself, because I had clearly done a good job of controlling what I had tried to control. And it communicated to her the appropriate way to make a massive change like that in your life, right? Not just go to parents and go, well, now I'm like bunking up. I welcome, I'm home and all my bills come with, so anyway, I think, I share that story because it's so true. It's so hard. It's really, really hard to do, but it's so true when you get help with how to respond and how to appropriately, emotionally regulate yourself. You're reflecting to them what the right ways to do that, which are lessons that are invaluable and will stay with them professionally and personally for the rest of their lives, really. So it's such a great, great point. And at the root of all that, I think, I mean, we talk about communication being key. It's the root of trust. It's the root of a lot of the things that we're talking about. But it is really, really hard sometimes to navigate communication with, this age group of our kids, with anybody really. I mean, communication is really difficult for people in general, let alone when our teens and young people are struggling, right? So what would you say are some ways that parents can foster more of an open, kind of supportive type of dialogue and communication in general to help them build that trust with their kids of this age?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think what we just talked about is one of those pieces. So really working on our reactions, right? So
Hmm.
they feel like when they come to us, we're not going to explode.
Yeah.
Allowing them to make their mistakes. And then also just, you know, we, just really just reaching in, when they have experiences, whether they're going out and they're testing boundaries, they're trying things that maybe we wouldn't think are the right choices, right? How are we going to respond to those moments? Are we going to say, you absolutely can never do that again? You're grounded for life, all
Yeah.
these things are what kind of, how are we reacting? And so we want to kind of create a space for them where they know that if they make choices that, are not in alignment with us and what we want, we can tell them that they're not in alignment with what we want, and that we're still here and we're going to help support them make the next best choice. And so, giving black and whites, like if you do this, you know, you'll never have this again, or, I'm taking this or I'm taking that. Like, we have to kind of understand that they're going to be doing things, they're going to be testing, and we need to decide in advance, like how we're going to respond to those things that is going to enable them to keep coming and sharing.
Yeah.
If we say, hey, call me, anytime you drink at a party, I won't ask questions and you won't have consequences. And then they call us and we lay into them and we take away their phone for a week and, all the things, right?
Yeah.
You think they're going to call us next time? You
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
So it's
Yeah.
like we have to kind of just think about those things. Like, if we want them to keep coming, sometimes we have to let go of some of our ideals,
Yeah.
things that we want in service of the bigger vision of keeping our connection with our
Yeah.
kids.
And, and part of that too, and tell me if you agree or not, maybe I'm wrongheaded in thinking about this, but part of that too is letting them suffer the consequences for those choices. Part of it, I mean, keeping open lines of communication and not reacting, negatively, like you're saying, there's a balance there, but to some extent, part of the struggle that I see these days, and of course it's easier to see it in other people, but is that we sometimes try to shield our kids from the consequences instead of letting them suffer a little. I mean, those are learning opportunities, right? So if a kid does something and you say, like, that's not in alignment with the way we do things in our house. And so when you make that choice, there's a way that you can have a conversation around it, but it doesn't mean there's not a consequence for that. And sometimes those consequences are completely external, that they're not consequences we've set, but we want to shield them from it or protect them. And I feel like there, of course, there's a balance, right? But I feel like oftentimes we go too far with that and it doesn't serve them. I mean, would you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think in relation to what we're talking about for sure. And then also, I see that play out so much with kids with anxiety. So,
Mm,
us over rescuing them when
yeah,
uncomfortable in situations like I'm either having a hard day at school, come pick me up. All the
yeah,
different things that we jump in and we try to fix and we try to rescue all the time. And this is just this is their testing ground right now. They are building the skills they need to be out in the world by themselves.
and
If
sometimes we forget
yeah,
that that's what this part of life is about,
yeah,
right? Like we
right.
forget that part.
Right. And if we're over rescuing and solving all their stuff, they're A, not figuring it out for themselves, and B, they're not building confidence in themselves. They no
Yeah,
longer believe in their own ability to resolve their issues or to persevere through hard moments. And so I think a lot of parents fall into that trap because we're so used to fixing and protecting from the time they're babies,
yeah,
right? And it's so needed when they're toddlers and
sure.
little kids and whatnot. But once they start getting into their teenage years, they absolutely need to start individuating and testing and messing up and figuring it out. Not to say that we're not going to be there to catch them and to support them and to let them vent, but
Mm-hmm.
we have to be careful because the more we pull them from school and pull them from the things that are hard, the scarier those things get and the harder it is for them to re-engage with those things later.
Yeah.
So overprotecting can really just halt them in their forward progress so
Yeah,
much.
for sure. And this is kind of related. Maybe it overlaps too much, but I think about how pervasive I would say, back to like interacting with so many students, and young people in that kind of that later teen to early 20s kind of time of life. They really in a big way, and I know I'm painting with a huge broad stroke here, but the sense of direction, the lack of sense of direction, that I don't know, like I don't know what I want to be. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going, that kind of thing. That seems really prevalent. And I think there's, to some extent, there's a natural, that's a natural thing, right? Like you shouldn't have to have it all figured out in your teens. And I really, like, side tangent here, it's part of why I take issue with some of what goes on. And these are only my views. These are not Jasmyne's views. And we haven't talked about this. So I'm not speaking for her. Let me put that disclaimer out there. But it's part of what I struggle with in terms of feeling misaligned. And when I was in public education, feeling misaligned with what was happening both in public schools and in higher ed, because where I was, we were doing a lot of work with partnerships with high schools in the college. And so it seemed that over the years, what had a kernel of really goodness in it and direction and support for students went too far the other direction, where we were like in seventh grade, they were pushing kids to decide the trajectory for the rest of their life as 13-year-olds, right? But there's a balance there too, because you want to help them to figure out their sense of purpose in life. You want to help guide them with like having some direction and drive, if you will. So how do you kind of balance that, not pushing them too hard, but helping to provide that guidance as parents, because it's not all on the school, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's such a key part of young people feeling confident and motivated when they have passions, when they have that sense of purpose or things that they're putting their energy into on a regular basis that helps to get them up in the morning, right? So when they start to isolate and game all day or scroll their phones all day and they're not putting their energy into things, it leads to depression. It leads to all kinds of things. It leads to that stuck feeling and not forward movement. And so I think our role as parents is that we really, need to provide them opportunities to explore lots of different things,
Yeah.
almost, while they're under our roof, making it kind of a requirement that, while you're here, you're going to be participating in something, and so we're going to try lots of things. I want it to be something that you're into, but it can be volunteering at the animal shelter, it can be joining a club, it can be being in a sports program, it can be getting a job. There's so many different things, but having them engage in
Yeah.
activities and learning skills, a musical instrument or any type of thing, art classes, things that they can start to get behind and be like, oh my God, I'm good at that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I really like that. Or I like the people that do
Mm-hmm.
that. And that's where, they can start to kind of like get that inspiration and that spark once they find the thing that they enjoy doing. And then they
Yeah.
start engaging with that. And so we still have a little bit of pull while they're in our house. Like we're paying their phone bills, we're paying their
Yeah.
gas sometimes, we're paying their car insurance. Like, hey, I'm happy to do all these things for you. And like, this is what I need you to
Yeah.
do.
And it's so true. I don't know that we necessarily, I know I didn't necessarily as a parent connect the involvement in those kinds of things to helping them have a sense of purpose in life and professional interests, right? Because it is, you're right, so very often that not only do you get just the sense of purpose in general, but you can figure out things like, what do I like? What do I not like? The kind of people, the culture around that type of thing, right? Maybe that leads me into what I want to do career-wise and who I want to be with. And because we think of like choosing a career kind of separate in a lot of ways, I think, from sports and art and music and all the opportunities. And so kind of giving them not only, like you said, the opportunity, but like making it a requirement. You don't get to just sit in your bedroom and play video games for your teen years. You actually have to get out and like talk to other human beings and try things out, right? What what
Mhm.
is your what is your stance on if you do something, you sign up for something, you have to see it through all the way to the end. Does that make sense? I think a lot of us as parents, we did in our house, and maybe it was wrongheaded thinking, but like if you wanted to play soccer and you started the season, you didn't have to play it again, but you had to finish the season. You had to go to practices and you had to, it was like a commitment kind of thing to like, what is your take on that? Should we let kids quit when they want
Mm.
to, or
I think it's nuanced for sure. I mean, I with my own kids, I definitely we encourage that, in our house. You did commit to this, and so we're going to show up. But there's also, moments where we need to be flexible. I always think that it's so important that our kids have a voice and a choice in the things that matter to them.
yeah.
When we dictate everything for them and, just lay it down like law and there's no flexibility, then that's again, trust is broken. It's like they're their own humans. They are people that deserve to have a say in their life. And so
Mm,
if they have some compelling reasons,
yeah.
maybe their coach is kind of slimy, or,
Yeah.
maybe
Right.
they have some, really big drama with a friend that's really, impacting their mental health. There's things that we want to consider. So we can have some guidelines or some, guideposts that we try to stick
Yeah.
by. I think it's so important to have flexibility and also just to always have them in the conversation with us, that we don't
Yeah.
make decisions for them.
It goes back to the trust too, like them trusting you that there will be the conversation. It's not so black and white, but that they can come to you. And again, kind of, modeling for them. Like if you have good reasons for this, like trust me to share your rationale tell me what's going on and why. Trust me to consider that. Like, that's how we talk, as you know, that, I mean, you're preparing them for adulthood. If something was going on at work, you would want them to be able to go in and lay out. It's not just because I feel like it today, but lay out, like, what are your reasons for this, and make a compelling case, if you will. And so if you give them that space, is what I'm hearing you say, like, you can have these guidelines, but if you give them that space to know that if I come to you with a compelling case, like, this is a discussion and I can have some say so in it, and it's not just you calling the shots all the time. That brings up another thought. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, but sometimes I also see, and it was certainly again in my house, there's a difference between how moms parent and dads parent sometimes. And so where I might have been a little more open to listening to the kids make their case about something, Roger was not as open. Everyone listening knows that, you know, my husband is Black. And so culturally, we had some different values that we were raised with that certainly have things to, you know, it's related to race too, but there's all kinds of differences that you come to this parenting situation if you're doing it with a partner. And we didn't always jive on those, right? And so it's almost like, you know, a precursor to having the open communication and the trust with your kid or young adult is having that conversation and trust with a partner, if there's another person involved in this, so that you guys are kind of on the same page, if you will, because you can't have kids that, again, you know, Lori's view on this, you can't have kids that know, well, I can do this with mom and it's a different set of rules with dad, or I can manipulate that situation. Does that make
Oh
sense?
yeah. Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree. Like trying to get on common ground and be on the same page and be a united front,
Yeah.
even if you're co-parenting and from different houses,
Yeah.
even more so, I would say, really taking the time to like come together and establish like, how are we going to handle these situations, and how are we going to support each other, when one of us, thinks, one part is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because so many kids are in a situation where they're being co-parented, right? And so, you know, these days, I mean, it's just a fact. That's the norm for so many kids. And I do think that if there's a disjuncture there, or if there's some kind of discord there, that can contribute to some of the struggles that we're talking about with these kids, the anxiety and the lack of direction and those kinds of things can impact it and complicate it. And then even further, if you're co-parenting and then there are new step parents, and then you've got, like, for us it was a Brady Bunch situation, you know, there's us co-parenting, and then there's the co-parenting situation of, you know, my kid's dad and Roger's kid's mom. And so you all kind of have to kind of try to get at least on a similar ground with regard to all of that with the kids. And that's not always easy. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think, you know, it's about like being adult, right? It's about that we're the adults and we've got to figure this out. And even though whatever my past was with that other person, like, in the best interest of the kids, like, let's get our shit together and do this right for them, right?
Yep. Totally.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't mean to get so passionate about that. You can see that I've had some experiences
Yeah.
in that
No, it's
that
it's deep
world, right?
stuff.
Everything we're talking about, it's easy to talk about it, but when you're in it, it really is a challenge. And so I give credit to everyone listening. If you're like, if this is resonating with you, like, you're in it and going through it, and it's tough. And so sometimes just like showing up today is a huge accomplishment. And so give yourself credit for that too.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's what I tell parents all the time. It's like, I see you. I mean, I see
Yeah.
you. The fact that you're here listening to this podcast, the fact that you're still a presence in your kid's life. It's like you're lasting, you're doing the work. I mean, so many kids do not have parents that have stuck it out with them.
Yeah,
And you just sticking it out and showing up every day and doing your best. I mean, that is so, so huge. And it's just, we're all learning, we're all growing. And
absolutely.
biggest thing is we don't give up. We don't give up on our kids. We keep showing up even though it's been hard. And we don't give up on their potential either, because each of them, no matter where they're at, it's like they have the potential to shift and change their lives for the better. And there are supports out there, and it's right there at your fingertips. and
Yeah.
it's easier than you might think. And
Yeah.
so what I would just say is, just connect them to the support that they need that's outside of the home, that's not your voice in their ear nagging them, like we like to do as moms, but
Hmm.
it's someone else that they can relate to, resonate with, that they can actually hear it from. And
Yeah.
then they can start taking those powerful steps for themselves in their life.
Yeah. So, and I know you guys listen to this podcast, on your way to work and while you're taking your walk, and and I love hearing all those stories. So, and that, kind of my commitment, because Lori can go on for a really long time. So I don't want us to turn this into like, an hour and a half kind of podcast. So I promise that I'm only going to ask Jasmine a couple more questions, but there are two really important things I think kind of embedded in what you were just talking about. One is, and it'll be my second question, but one is, kids aren't always, and young people, I should say, aren't always really very receptive to getting connected to outside help, right? I mean, we can make a choice to get some outside help for ourselves to help us in guiding this. But I don't think there's any shame in, and I know that that's what Jasmine is saying too. There's no shame in connecting your kids to outside help, because it doesn't have to all be on you. And so I want to ask you about kids who are resistant to that, like, how can you kind of navigate that part of it? But
Hmm.
you made a comment about not giving up. And I'd really love for us to kind of explore this a little bit. And again, selfishly, I'm going to share a little bit of my story to situate this. And I know a lot of the moms that I talk to, this is a source of pain. It's a source of embarrassment and shame. So here's the situation. You don't want to give up on your kids, but let's talk about the sort of complexity of that, right? So everyone knows that our oldest child really struggled with drugs, had a bout with some severe drug addiction. It ended up leading to us raising our grandson for a while. He was older than the group of kids that we're talking about. He wasn't in his early 20s, but I can look back and point to failings as a mom that contributed to that situation in his life, right? And so I accept that, and I do the therapy about it, right? But when we were going through it, one of the things I had to learn was the differences between enabling his dangerous behaviors and choices, giving up on him completely, and setting boundaries that were appropriate, where I wasn't giving up, but I also wasn't ignoring or facilitating. Does that make sense? And so I guess my question in there is, how do you not give up? But when you have a young person who's like really struggling on that kind of a level or similar, financial, it can be drugs, I hear lots of different things that I would kind of put in this arena. How do you balance the not giving up, being there, but they're off the rails and doing things that are, you just cannot be part of? Does that make sense? I don't know that I answered or asked that very clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the line between supporting them and enabling them, right? Is kind of what you're asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, sometimes there are those hard boundaries. I mean, I don't typically, the coaching work I do, I don't work with kids that are addicted to substances or things like
Yeah.
that. So there are, amazing programs for rehabilitation for that kind of thing. But yeah, sometimes there is that tough love stuff, where it's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm sorry, you can't have money right now, or whatever, so there are those hard boundaries.
Right.
Um, but underneath it, like that part of not giving up, it's like always, viewing our kids, even if they're young adults, as those like amazing, beautiful little beings that we brought into this world,
Mhm.
and I had to really make that shift for myself with when I was struggling with my son, because I was looking at him through a negative lens. And I had to remind myself, like, this is my precious boy who I, love to the moon and back. And I even started, at that point, I started calling him buddy. I was like, hey, buddy,
Mm,
and just the remembrance that this is my friend, this is my kid, this is like, the person that I care so much about. And so it's like, even when they messed up the day before and they come down the stairs, it's like, good morning. It's
yeah.
not like you're holding on to all this resentment and stuff that they can feel coming off of you. It's like, every day it's like, I'm still here. I'm still loving you, and if you're ready for the hug, I've got you, it's like you're
Yeah.
not holding it against them or over their heads, like the mistakes that they've made. And so you're setting the boundaries, you're doing the things in, as kind and compassionate of a way as you can, but
Yeah.
you're also keeping that lens that this is my kid.
Yeah, this is the baby I swaddled and brought home and, kissed all over his forehead. Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a really great tip to put those, it may seem small, like the little habitual kinds of habits and endearments and hugs and, to put those in place in a regular way. And again, I think that goes to building trust with your kids too, because even sometimes I didn't like things that my daughter did, and I would tell her, I don't like that, but I love you.
Mhm.
Right. And that's the distinction, I think, there. It doesn't mean that you are accepting or you're okay with, a choice that they made. You can be not okay with a choice that they made, but still show them love and
Mhm.
still be that, remember that, he's your buddy and that
Yep.
kind of thing. Again, I think this goes back to oftentimes it goes back to how we were parented,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's tough to do that sort of examination and exploration of like what's being carried over that's a great thing to carry over, and what is something that my parents probably didn't do better because I didn't know better, but now I can see it for what it was and I don't want to parent in that way, right? I remember my dad would say, and he doesn't listen to this podcast, but I remember he would say like, I'm so disappointed in you. The way that he said it, I would have rather like get a belt and beat me. Like, please, like, will you hit me? I would so much rather, but it was almost like this emotionally kind of
Mhm.
blackmailing me sort of
Yep.
way. And I really tried very hard to be aware of those kinds of things and not do, and I love my dad and, it's not about that. I'm not like, over in the corner doing harmful things because I have this horrible parent. But you can still love your parents and recognize things that they did that you don't want to do. Right. It
Mhm.
was just a shitty way to parent.
Yeah. Well, it's our default mechanism. It's our
Yeah.
default mode of parenting is what we've been modeled, right? And so that's why it comes back to like, what are we modeling? Because our kids are so much smarter than do what I say, not what I do.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
so much smarter. They don't fall for that trick, right? If you're telling them to do things, but you're not doing it yourself, it's like it's nothing. And so I mean, I feel like with as a parent, the only way I can really get in there and teach my kids like how to live in this world is to show them.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't listen to my words. They watch me.
Yeah. And
That's
if
it.
your kids choose to have kids, your parenting and all the things that we're talking about, it's helping them to model for how they will, and so talk about breaking the cycle or like improving the cycle, right? I mean, this is certainly the way that you do it. If you want your daughter to be a good mom, you got to be a good mom.
Mm-hmm.
If you want your son to have a good relationship with a future partner, you need to be a good mom. So, and I will end with this question about kids who don't really want to be hooked up with help like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fine, leave me alone kind of thing. Are there some tips you can give for like, how do we help them to get the support that they need? I mean, do you force them into it? Do you just tell them that's the way it's going to be? Is there a good way to get them connected to outside help?
Yeah, I mean, I come across this all the time, right? Parents come and they have discovery calls with me and like, I want this for my kid so much, and then they can't get their kid on the call. And so a lot of what I do now is I have them bring their kid with them for starters because it's just too hard later to have them come back the second time. But I have 5 tips I share with parents about how to help their teens and young adults move through resistance. And the first one is tying it to what they want for themselves.
Mm,
Right. So
yeah,
if you can really get in there and help, like, are you happy with how things are right now? What is it that you'd like to see for yourself in your life? Have you been able to get there on your own? So really tie it to their own personal goals, their own desires, their own ideal self. That's number one, because that can be a big motivator, right? What do
for
they want
sure.
to
What do
shift?
we want? That's a selfish. I mean, we're human beings. We have a selfish drive. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yep. And the second one is to remind them that most successful people, so whether it's people in business or sports or acting or anything like that. They reach their success with the help of a coach. I mean, that's just
That's
how
right.
people do it. You want to go be an
Yep.
actor, you get a coach. You want to be a singer, you get a voice lesson teacher. You want to be a
Such a
baseball
good
player, you get a
point.
coach, right?
Yep.
Everyone gets a coach when they want to excel at something or do something really well or succeed in any way. And so getting a coach is just a normal way to help yourself get from point A to point B, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then remind them that when someone gets the support of a coach, they're just basically ensuring that they're going to achieve their goals so much faster with so much less heartache and like messing up and trying to figure it out on your own than if you just got someone that knows what to do and gives you the roadmap, right?
Yeah.
And has the accountability and all the things for you. So those are a few of them. And then also just letting them know that they get to decide. So
Mm,
if they know they're in choice and you're not forcing this on them, they
mm-hmm.
feel empowered in that decision. And then it could actually work,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If I won't take a teen that's being forced to come to me,
Yeah.
there's no point. They're not going to get anything out of it. They're going to be shut down. So they have to decide and be empowered to make the choice for themselves. And so that brings me to the fifth point, which is only make that choice once you've met the coach and you've heard from them and you've felt the vibe and you've seen if there's a rapport and you've checked it out and then
Yeah.
you decide, then you make
Yeah.
choice. So
Wow, that is so good. So good. And like I said, we could go on for hours. Here's what I would love to do is, are you taking clients? Are you taking young people and in an online capacity? I know you have an online program. Are you open to talking to if, some women listening to this podcast wants to have a discovery call with you and talk about or maybe her and her young adult have a discovery call with you, like how are you taking clients and how do they connect with you to make that happen?
yeah, yeah,
Tell
I
us a
am.
little bit about your
Yeah.
program too, if you don't
Okay,
mind.
cool. Yeah, so I am starting up a new round of my 12-week online coaching program October 1st. And so I'm currently talking to parents and teens right now and getting them enrolled for that next cohort that's starting. It's a 12-week program. There's three components. We have online weekly group coaching. So it's a group of teens in there with me, really teaching them the tools and strategies they need, right? And just opening the doorway for all the different mindset shifts, where they're placing their focus, looking in and talking about like the automatic negative thoughts that are spinning in their heads and the results of that in their life. And
Yeah.
so just giving them ways to really get in there and shift those things. And the cool thing about the group stuff is that they see that, hey, I'm not alone. Like there's all these other young people my age out there going through the same stuff, trying to navigate this, figure it out. So they get this community. And then they also get 3 one-on-one coaching sessions with me too. So we get to really dive into their personal challenges, their personal goals, and really like establish that at the beginning, middle, and end, and really work them through that whole transformational process.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's also just a membership site with all of, on-demand videos and weekly practice. And so it's this full wraparound. They have weekly tech support, just lots and lots of stuff. And it's just this immersion for 12 weeks of like, hey, I'm going to spend this time to make some powerful shifts in my life so I can really create the life I want for myself and not be stuck in these feelings of anxiety and, lack of self-esteem and lack of direction, lack of purpose, but really propel myself forward so I can be happy. I can feel good
Yeah.
in life. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I told you she did amazing work, you guys. I told you. So if somebody's interested in talking to you or getting more information, do you have a link to book an appointment? Is there an application? Like what's the process?
Yeah, I'm open to, I DM people all the time, so you're welcome to send me a DM. I know that my socials will be in the show
Hmm.
notes. So that's one avenue. I have a scheduling link as well that I can include that they can
Yeah,
make
yeah,
little
send me that and we'll put it in
me.
the show notes for people
Yeah.
too. But I would absolutely encourage you to DM her because I know sometimes people will click on my scheduling link too, and they'll see that there's not a time that, and I'm like, then later they'll say, well, I tried to schedule with you last month, but there just wasn't a time. I'm like, never do that. Always reach out in the DM. Anytime you're trying
Yeah.
to get a call, get on a call or get on someone's schedule, always, you're not going to bother someone. Like reach out and go, hey, like there's no time, like my only time is in the evenings or whatever. So reach
Yeah.
out to her, but I do want to include your scheduling link too, because I know sometimes that's just super quick. If somebody clicks it and they find a spot and they get on it, it's done.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have a tendency, and you guys know I talk about this all the time. If you are hearing my voice, we think about doing something and then we get busy with the million things going on in our lives. And before we know it, days, weeks, months have gone by and we're like, oh, I meant to XYZ. And all it does is delay you solving that issue, or at least getting the information so that you can make it an informed decision about whether you want to move forward or not, or go in a different direction. So I thank you so much, Jasmine. I can't say it enough. I think the work that you're doing is amazing. It's so needed. It's just so needed. I mean, it's amazing work. And I cannot overemphasize the impact and the quality that I think you have the opportunity to touch and change so many young people's lives, which really is in all of our best interest. Because I know it sounds cliche, but I mean, they are the future. And so when we're old and needing help, like, this is the generation that we're talking about that will be taking care of us. So we want them to be as solid and strong and have a really great belief in themselves. And you have an opportunity to impact them in that way. And so you really are reaching into the future and making it better. So if you guys are listening to this and you have any questions at all, Jasmine's one of the easiest people to talk to. Just reach out. I'm sure she'll answer questions for you in the DMs too. And do schedule a call if you're seriously interested in getting information about help for your young person. I cannot recommend her any higher. She's amazing. So thanks so
Thank you so
much.
much.
I
Yeah.
really appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you too. Thanks so much for having me on. It's an honor to be here.
You are so welcome. You may have to come back in the future, okay?
That
So,
would be
and you guys
great.
always know you can reach out to me too. You can send me any questions. I'm happy to do a three-way introduction and then jump out of the conversation if you don't want to just, cold DM Jasmine. I'm happy to make that introduction for you. Or if you have any questions that you want to ask me first before you reach out to her, you guys know that my DMs are always open. You can do that, and I'll connect you with her too. But yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate you spending
Yeah.
time with me, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.
Right. Bye. Bye, everyone.